Hello and welcome YouTube to an episode 2 of If You Don't Know, Get to Know, where I've got an absolute fantastic guest on the show today who's going to give us an insight into the world of football. This isn't top profile players, but these are the future players who could potentially go on to win Ballon d'Ors, the unknown heroes, the unscouted players who could come into your club and bring that glory. We've seen many players who have come from the unknown. Martinelli at Arsenal was one example who no one really knew, coming from the third division of Brazilian football into stardom at Arsenal. This is where I'm going to bring James Rowe, and we're going to talk about the future of football and how he became a football interviewer and writer. But before we get into that, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button whilst I hit that intro. Welcome back, people. I've got a brilliant guest. I'm not even going to try and justify introducing him because everyone knows who he is. He's the person who's going to bring us a lot of our future stars, interviewing them before they actually get a big name for themselves. James, introduce yourself. Obviously, everything's in the link in the description for his pod, for the interviews he's done, for the articles he's released. I'll let him kind of tell us everything. Who do you work for? What do you do? And where can they find you?
First and foremost, afternoon, Suleiman. Thank you very much for the invitation. Hello to everybody who's seeing me for the first time today. You might have heard my voice on different Arsenal-related podcasts or read my interviews through the years. My name is James Rowe. I'm a football writer based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And you can read my interviews with professional players and managers on the websites such as the Secret Footballer website, as well as Football CFB. If you Google me as well, you'll see my work from my previous publishers. I recently went over the threshold of interviewing over 300 professional players and managers at all levels of world football. It made me really proud to look back on a fantastic portfolio with, among others, the likes of Jamie Carragher, Simon Barker, Ricky van Bollenwinkel, and Graham Potter of Brighton. But I always say that every professional player or manager has a story to tell. You know, this is a world game. And lots of people were asking me in the run-up to that week where Football CFB, one of my publishers, did a special interview with me. So it was nice that the boot was on the other foot. I had a lot of people asking me, you know, what's been the highlight? And I said, well, the highlight is to reach 300. I said, because, you know, I started out in a place called Hertogenbosch in the middle of the Netherlands, interviewing the then manager of FC Den Bosch, William Vloed. And to go on to have spoken to the likes of Viv Anderson, for example, to have spoken to the likes of Jamie Carragher, being an Arsenal fan as well, Bob Wilson, and the likes of Kevin Campbell. You know, it's nice to show everybody that football is a world game, and also touching on different continents. I look back with the African players that I've spoken to, the likes of Nwanko Obiore, who plays for Boavista, and also Stanley Amusi, who won the African Cup of Nations with Nigeria. And also Denilson, of course, who played for Arsenal. It's nice to touch on the fact that it's a world game, and also with women's football being, you know, very much in the growth, and to have interviewed half of the women's side that started that World Cup final and won the European Championships in 2017. So I like to think that the readers, when they read any of my interviews, regardless of level, regardless of stature, I like to think that they always understand or read something they didn't know before, because, you know, football is it's a world game. This isn't fantasy football. This isn't FIFA. This is real life football. So it's nice to let people know about the ins and outs that they might not have known before.
No, 100%, James. Now, this is why, similar to what you're doing, is why this whole series came about. It's kind of introducing people to a new world, and essentially, when you're kind of going through life, sometimes you're not aware of how, especially with this whole new, you know, sort of wave of social media where anyone can do anything. You being a prime example of that. I don't know whether you've been an ex-player or not, but someone that's not been in the footballing world as a professional, maybe like myself, being able to come out and talk about football is amazing. But one question I do want to ask you, right, and this kind of intrigues a lot of people, is when you were a kid, what did you actually want to do, or was this always the dream?
The dream was to always do something within football. I mean, you're talking to the guy who would do mock FA Cup draws on his Sega Mega Drive. That would play the Sega Mega Drive and do a match report about the game that he played. This was back in the day when FIFA didn't have the license, and they had the producers of the FIFA games. So you had the names like Macmillan and Lowe, and I was always, fascinated with football. And would you believe it, Suleiman? My football club changed my life. A lot of people on today's show might think, what's a British guy? How did he end up in Amsterdam? My football club made sure I ended up in this city, and that started out with. I always harboured ambitions of wanting to watch my team Arsenal play abroad, and this was back in the day when you had 2 group stages in the Champions League, and Arsenal were drawn in a group with Roma, Valencia, and Ajax, and I made a pact with a then colleague and friend. We're going to go to one of the away games, and when the draw was made, he asked me. He said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "I want to go to Rome." He said, "You don't want to go to Amsterdam?" I said, "No, I want to go to Rome." Fate conspired. And we ended up in Amsterdam, and it literally changed my life because I always wanted to live and work abroad from a very young age, and it was something that burned deep inside me. I think when you speak to especially football writers in the domain that we are, you take Tim Vickery, for example. Tim Vickery moved to Brazil at a fairly young age, but he always knew he wanted to live and work abroad. And I think in terms of the people that actually do it, because it's one of the most daunting things you can undertake, but it makes you as a man. If you just said to me when I was at school that you would go on to interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue, I would have said you was mad. But it just goes to show that you've literally got to give everything you've got. And I remember being in a you have the Dutch course here in the Netherlands for foreigners, and I remember my first lesson. We were 20 of us, all sat around a huge, massive table from everywhere: Turkey, New Zealand, Germany, France, Spain, and you all had to introduce yourself. When it come to the final exam, there was 4 of us left, and I was the only male. Everyone else said, "Oh, it's far too difficult. Oh, I can't do it." I still love it now, especially in the case of speaking to Dutch players and managers. Because I have people that come up to me and say, "Oh, James, is your mother English? Is your father English? Or are you British? Is your family British?" I said, "Yes, I'm British." I said, "I was born and raised there," because I learned the language so well to the best of my ability. But anybody watching today one thing I'm passionate about, Cinnamon, is anyone, worldwide, people often say about British people not speaking foreign languages, but we do exist. And there are some excellent people around the world. And anybody watching today who's maybe struggling learning a foreign language or thinking, "Oh, I'm not really very good," push through that brick wall and never give up. I am man enough to say, when I first started to speak Dutch, I was useless, absolutely rubbish. But I'd never, ever worked so hard in my life. And if you keep working hard and you keep working hard, it's become the passport to not only a happy and successful life, but also my football writing. We wouldn't be here today if I didn't start interviewing Dutch players and managers. And then it was primarily that, and then a different publisher came in for me, and before you know it, you get British players and managers or players based in different countries, and then it kind of snowballs from there. And everyone's got a story to tell, and it's about never giving up and always making sure that you tell the truth. Easiest thing in the world to do, just tell the truth. It's not about me. It's about the player. It's about the coach. It's about the referee. It's about the manager. I'm just someone who kind of puts it out there for the world to see in my own style, and look back with pride on a wonderful portfolio, and onwards and upwards.
No, 100%, James. And I've seen some of the interviews that you've done, and it's incredible that if you utilize and one of the questions I'm going to ask you is, obviously we've all seen the dark side of social media and like how toxic it can be, but in your opinion, how can you use social media, let's say, to kind of elevate your sort of career? Or was it not social media? Was it something else that kind of helped you or brought you to the forefront of these publishers and people who you work with today?
Well, these publishers got in contact with me. One thing that makes me proud is I didn't go after them; they came after me. And obviously, I have a social media following, and I don't have loads of followers, only just over 7,000. But I always think it's a responsibility. You've got a responsibility to tell people, give them your opinion, and be respectful to people. you've got to be respectful to people. I mean, obviously, I'm in a privileged position where I interview professional players and managers, but you've got to remember that, I've met some good people through social media, and obviously I get a lot of messages every day asking me for contacts. Oh, I hear you spoke to so-and-so. Can you pass on his number? Never ever am I any liberty to pass on any private information to a third party. But a lot of people think, oh, they see the big names and they see the bright lights, but you have to earn your stripes first. I would be going in when I started out in this journey, Suleiman. I would go to places like Breda, Zwolle, Venlo, Enschede. These are places that Dutch people hardly go to unless they've got a really good reason. And I was going there to speak to an unknown player or manager. And it's important to treat everybody the same. People think, people often ask what my favourite interview is. And I say I don't have favourite interviews. I have watershed interviews where, the likes of William Floot being the very first professional to give me his time, getting a personal phone call from Danny Cowley, receiving wonderful compliments from the likes of Jamie Carragher and Simon Barker. It does make you very proud. But my main goal is not to be famous on social media. My main goal is to hopefully work on the media side of a professional club one day. That's the main goal. And I'd like to think that each interview brings me that little bit closer. So it's about doing justice to everybody. And if you've got the opportunity to give someone or pay someone a massive compliment, do it, because it can give them even more encouragement. I see people in some cases with saying about the subscribers or getting to a certain amount. Quality is also very important. We're in a world where everybody wants to have attention, everybody wants to be looked at, but the fact remains you've only got 24 hours in a day and you've got to use your time wisely. So I would say that it can be for good and bad use, but I would just encourage people, don't always look at the amount of followers that somebody's got, because that doesn't tell all the story. It's always about the depth that, that someone can tell you something that you didn't know before.
Yeah. No, 100%, James. And obviously me kind of entering the social media world recently, I'd say during lockdown, I started to kind of in the background build that contact and network. And, I kind of wanted to ask you, because I think you gave a brilliant answer. I think it was either on Twitter or someone's video that I watched. And the advice that you gave to people about networking was brilliant. I think it was either you or Callum that actually touched on this. And I thought that advice was really good. Where you kind of spoke about you've got to kind of build that network before you can actually kind of grow. What's the key to networking? How do you kind of go about it? Are there any secrets, or is it simply just try and get your name out there the best you can?
I think what you've got to do is you've got to offer people something that nobody else can. Yeah. And I'll give you an example. I know I've touched on it already, but my interviews with Dutch players and managers, there's very few British people, full stop, that can speak Dutch to an exceptionally high level, let alone interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue. So that's my unique selling point. That selling point has got me in a position to interview Dutch players and managers, and then it kind of snowballs from there. You also have to be aware of the preparation you have to do. You have to know about players and managers. You have to think about questions that maybe not many people will ask. I'll give you an example. I spoke to Rule Fox, who Tottenham fans will remember, who Norwich fans and Newcastle fans will remember. And I asked him about playing international football for Montserrat. And he said to me, James, he said, I don't believe it. He said, when I woke up this morning, never in a million years did I think you'd ask me that question. I said, well, you've got so many football writers trying to get into such a small space. I said, I've got to do what I can to stand out. I said, and obviously with the unique selling points of interviewing in foreign languages, also interviewing in Spanish as well. But it's about, you've got to have an organic growth. I mean, people see my interviews with Jamie Carragher and Simon Barker and Danny Cowley and Viv Anderson, but they maybe don't know of the smaller interviews I did in very small places in the Netherlands. But without those smaller interviews, there would be no Jamie Carragher or Viv Anderson or Simon Barker. So each one prepares you for the next one. And just being aware that you're dealing with professionals at all times and making sure that you're respectful. I'm also very proud of the women's game, to have the ability to to speak to Dutch players and managers of the women's game, that won the European Championships in 2017. And also, Chloe Lacasse as well, playing for Benfica. And, a massive football club, Benfica, but the women's club has only been in existence for 2 seasons. So these kind of small nuggets of information, it's nice to put that out there and realise that, that people need to realise it really is a world game. And I think I get a lot of people giving the impression that they judge a player on their Instagram, or they judge a player on their clout, when in the real world, it doesn't work like that. I'll give you an example. Mark Albrighton is a Premier League winner with Leicester, FA Cup semi-finalist with a good chance of winning the FA Cup. He's a Premier League winner, but he's not just a passive Premier League winner. He was as important to Leicester in that Premier League winning season as Riyad Mahrez and Jamie Vardy. A lot of those balls over the top for Jamie Vardy, people seem to think they fell out of the sky. They were pinpoint passes by Mark Albrighton. I've often advocated on Arsenal Twitter, Arsenal signing Albrighton, only to be told he's useless, he's rubbish, we don't want him. But I'm thinking he's achieved something which Ozil never achieved, which is highly unlikely that Aubameyang, Lacazette, Partey will achieve, and that is to win a league title. How on earth he's not been capped by England, I'll never know. And I think particularly with Arsenal fans, they appear to judge a player on their clout and charisma rather than their playing characteristics, and I think that's very dangerous. I think one advice I'd like to give to people today, anybody watching, don't be afraid to give your opinion, because it's your opinion. Nobody can take it away from you. If you've seen something with your own eyes, which you believe he or she is an excellent footballer, then stick to that opinion. Don't let anyone tell you, oh, they're rubbish, you don't know what you're talking about, because you are the one that's formed that opinion. And also the previous of a player. I see Arsenal fans in particular compiling lists of who we need to buy in the summer. But I don't see these Arsenal fans being aware of the personal situation of these players. And I don't see Arsenal fans citing the situation regarding William Saliba. What is to stop a young player, if you're coveted by Arsenal, what is to stop you saying to the club, if they come in for you this summer, what is to stop me ending up like William Saliba? Because what a lot of football fans forget, particularly with younger players when they move abroad, is that having spoken to players and managers where a transfer has made their career and broken their career, many of the young players moving abroad for the first time are learning life skills. They're learning how to cook, they're learning how to clean, they're learning how to look after themselves. And the club becomes your family. And if you don't play, then you can also be marginalised and a little bit disillusioned. So I see a lot of people compiling lists when also the flip side of that, Suleiman, is that clubs are being spammed. Clubs are being spammed by WhatsApp messages of, we've got this player, you want to take a look, in the hope that somebody will take the bait. These are things that normal football fans on Twitter don't see. Yes, I'm privileged to certain information, but it's about making sure that everybody's aware of these things, because a football career is very, very short. It goes by in the blink of an eye. And when a player is finished, they look back on their career and they think, did I do enough? Did I make the right decisions during my career?
100%. I'm glad you hit on that Saliba one, because that was something I wanted to touch on in terms of, obviously, the whole situation behind it, obviously losing his mother, losing his father earlier on, and become basically an orphan and then moving countries. And people are kind of giving a lot of stick to Arteta in that regard. I kind of wanted to get a bit more of a further understanding. So, from your understanding of speaking to, let's say, younger players who are coming up the ranks of even Dutch football or English football, and obviously everywhere else in Europe that you have interviewed, what do you think that how do you think Arteta Arsenal have handled the situation the best they could have, or do you think they could have maybe done more, or what would your sort of professional opinion on that be?
Great question, by the way. I think first and foremost, I'd like to touch on the fans. I see Arsenal fans cherry picking quotes about what was originally said. And I've tried to pull a couple of them up. I said to a couple of Arsenal fans on Twitter, I said, who wrote those quotes? Oh, the network. I said, no, that's not what I asked. I said, whose name is on it? I said, I'll give you an example. I interview in Dutch. I translate it from Dutch to English, but my name is on it. So if there's anything that's wrong within that interview, you can come at me. But you see a lot of Arsenal fans cherry picking quotes. And when I try to ask them, where did you get these quotes from? They'll be vague and say the network or this person or that person. When you interview in foreign languages, you have a responsibility to tell the truth when you interview in any language. But if you're translating quotes and as someone who does that, you've got a massive responsibility. Whether that person is really well known or not so well known, this is going out onto the internet and you can't pull it back afterwards. So you've got an opportunity and you've got a duty to do the player or manager justice as well as yourself. And I think the club as well, you know, Arsenal's biggest problem, and I say this as a fan of more than 30 years, Arsenal have an owner where he just views Arsenal as a healthy investment. That's it. He's not concerned with the sporting progress. He's not concerned with the glory of previous years. He just sees Arsenal as a healthy investment. And we can change all the things we want. We can change a new manager. We can have a new system. We can believe in this manager. We can write off this player. But the fact remains, until a new owner comes in who puts the welfare of Arsenal Football Club first, I do not see us making significant progress. Obviously, as well, touching on Unai Emery, some Arsenal fans thought it was appropriate to mock Unai Emery's linguistic skills. To that, I say to them, how many languages do you speak? Are you aware of how difficult it is to undertake any foreign language, regardless of difficulty? And I see Arsenal fans that thought it was appropriate to mock that, which was very sad to see. Not all of them, of course, but there were some. And I just think, as a fan base as well, I've been supporting the club for more than 30 years. I've seen the era before Arsene Wenger, during and after Arsene Wenger. And I've seen a lot of changes in the fan base, Suleiman. A lot of changes. Some of the younger fans have never seen Arsenal win the league. And they've certainly never seen Arsenal win in Europe. Never. And the disdain of Champions League, I would often, before the COVID outbreak, I would return from the Netherlands to London for football matches of Arsenal. And I would go to the matches against Rennes, against Sparty Borisov, against Ostersunds. And I would hear around me at the turnstiles, I would hear, oh, it's just a pub team tonight, we'll beat these. When nothing could be further from the truth. Apart from the commercialism in football, the biggest change is that there's so many players playing at all different levels now. The coaching has vastly improved. There's no massive gap anymore. The gap between the seasoned European teams and the lesser European teams is decreasing year upon year upon year. And I think in terms of the club, we're just going through the motions at the moment. And I think it's going to be a long while before we fully embrace that and try to move forward.
No, I echo a lot of what you say, because obviously the club is obviously going through what we call a rebuild. And I think what people have this weird expectation that it's all it's going to be is like an overnight thing, which in football, everyone knows that either rarely ever happens, unless you're chucking like basically your whole bank at it. It's never really going to happen. It's unrealistic what they want. But one of the questions I kind of wanted to ask related to kind of becoming a football writer and interviewer is this sort of traditional notion that you need to have education or you need to have certain qualification. How true, or is that true? Or am I kind of just thinking that you don't actually need it, but you can still get into becoming a football like journalist, writer, interviewer?
I think it depends on what you're actually doing within that realm. To touch on what obviously education that I've had in Great Britain and also here in the Netherlands, what got me into this world was the ability to speak foreign languages. So that was your passport in. But that doesn't relate to everybody. Obviously, you need a little bit of luck as well, but you also need to have a massive amount of knowledge. for example, I was a young boy and I never read children's books. And my mother would go to parents' evening and the teacher would say, yeah, James is doing okay at school, but we noticed he doesn't read children's books. And my mum said, yes, that's correct. He said, my son is 7 years old and he's telling me that I'm going up to bed now, mum, because I'm going to read my football programs. And I would spend a long time through my youth, night after night, reading football programs. And obviously, when you're very young, you're just kind of looking at pictures and looking at the team sheets. But then as I got older, there used to be a thing in the Arsenal programme, there still is, but this is going back into the early 90s when we was knocked out by Benfica. They used to have a scene around Europe, and I used to be fascinated, absolutely fascinated with, scene around Europe and learning about the world as well. Like, for example, improving geographically, like I would associate capital cities with football clubs. Or you'd be sitting in a geography lesson and the teacher would say Lisbon, and you would say, oh, Benfica. Or they would say Prague in Czechoslovakia, and you would say, oh, Sparta Prague, for example. And, you kind of learn all about that. But you've got to have a thirst for knowledge. You've got to be able to retain knowledge as well, because you see a lot of people who do interviews, and although they try very hard, they sometimes can appear to be a little bit rushed. Me personally, yeah. I literally give my life to every single interview until it's absolutely spot on. It's not being published. And one of the things I'm pleased about with the Secret Footballer in particular is that was very much a British-based football. And all of a sudden, they are confronted with the women's striker of Benfica. They are confronted with the Gambian striker of FC Zurich, who's gone on to qualify for the African Cup of Nations. And it was for them a little bit of a culture shock. The publishers, they're delighted, which is fantastic, but also with such a Twitter following and to go out to so many people, it's nice to help broaden people's horizons in that respect.
No, 100%. Like, I agree. Like, even when I was a kid as well, I love to just kind of tactically analyze games. That's what I've always been doing. I remember like my family being kind of like, you don't even support this team. Why are you watching them? And I'm like, yeah, but I just like watching football. That's what I've always been fascinated by, and just kind of sitting there and kind of pausing the TV just to see like certain moves, going back to see certain things happen in a game. Why did that lead to that? And I totally, yeah, do like echo what you're saying. That it's the knowledge is key for anything you do, because you don't want to be unprepared, and especially when you say you put your life into each interview. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell people. Look, I've only just started off and I'm kind of learning the journey as I go, but I'm realizing that each interview and each sort of show that I do, the amount of background planning that goes into it, you could be awake till about 2-3 o'clock, just kind of planning. And even then you're like, oh, was that right? Was this right? Or I could do this instead. Is what people don't see. They just see this, what we've got here, James, like me and you just talking to each other. People are, oh yeah, there must be no background planning. But even leading to this interview, I've watched like hours worth of content of yourself being on other people's channels, kind of understanding who is James. Like, that's what I need to know first before I can even approach an interview and question yourself and kind of what you do. Because I could just come into here and be like, I don't know anything about James. What am I going to ask him? And you can tell that by someone who's done their homework and done their research or their planning to someone who's just turned up on the day kind of thing. Which is brilliant that you brought that up as well. And so Dylan has actually brought up a question that I was going to ask you as well. How nervous were you before your first interview, and has that changed, or are you still kind of, do you take every interview as if it was your first in terms of the nerves, or have they kind of calmed down and you're a bit more confident?
Well, first and foremost, a great question. I'd say nerves, but mainly because you want it to go well. I mean, I remember being invited by William Vloed, who also managed ADO Den Haag and Sparta Rotterdam here in the Netherlands. He invited me to the stadium, and we sat out overlooking the pitch. And I remember sitting in the reception area with my little notebook, thinking, right, you are about to embark on your very first interview with a professional player or manager, but not just any old interview. You're going to be doing this in his mother tongue. But I felt really proud. And this is a manager who gave Jasper Cillessen his first break. Jesper Cillessen, who's now in the Dutch national team, set up playing for Valencia, of course, and had a good career at Ajax and Nijmegen. And it was just nerves that you wanted it to go well. And then things kind of snowball, and it's mainly you've done it more than 300 times over. So you know how you feel in terms of interviews. They all have their own rhythm as well. Some players are more talkative than others. The important thing is to respect the rhythm of an interview. Obviously, I'm the same person, but obviously when you're interviewing in Dutch and you're interviewing in Spanish and you're interviewing in English, it's the different rhythm. Obviously, the language itself as well in terms of flowing. So in the beginning, yes, I was nervous on that particular day, but that was more hoping it would go well. And then obviously now, with the likes of some fairly big names all over Europe, it makes me very proud. But it's all about making sure that you get yourself ready, that hopefully if a media position does become available on a professional club or at a professional club, that you're ready for it. Because I see a lot of people behind the scenes at clubs who, I don't think when they started their specific roles, I don't think they had in excess of 300 interviews with professional players and managers. And I've already got that in the pocket. So literally it's about preparing yourself for when they call, because if they call, you've got to be ready.
No, 100%, especially in this sort of world we're living in now, where it's so competitive for any job you go out there, even, sort of what is traditionally a low-skilled, even retail jobs are very competitive. There could be another 100 people going for them jobs where you don't particularly need high-level qualifications. So I can imagine, like yourself, James, where you're trying to go for a club media position, how competitive it can be to have that sort of 300 interviews behind you. Not only does it show that you've taken the initiative to kind of build at yourself from going from sort of the bottom and building your way up in terms of fame, should we say, or the clout that the interviewee has is brilliant as well. And I think clubs are going to see that passion through you, because some people think you can just jump the gun.
Certainly not. If you fail to be original, you will get found out very quickly. If you fail to be original, you will get found out pretty quickly. I get almost every day, Suleiman, someone at some point of my day will say to me, James, have you thought about YouTube? Maybe you're starting your own channel. And I said, look, I interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue. I interview Spanish players and managers in their mother tongue. I said, if I'm interviewing a Dutch player or manager and it takes 20 minutes, that means that I upload the video on YouTube. You have to crop the video, do all the subtitles, do all the translation. I said, that can take an awful lot of time. I said, I'm not afraid of hard work. I said, but in the written sense, if I'm translating from Dutch to English, an interview that's 20, 25 minutes, that will take me about, 2 hours, not even that. And then that one is ready to go, and then it gets published. So it's a lot easier to find the flow. I don't have a ESPN behind me or a BBC. Although on Football Focus, you don't hear. I don't think they've ever had a Dutch interview on Football Focus. So if they're looking for a world first exclusive, I'm happy to do it. But I think they'll have to get in touch first. But we'll just have to see. But it's about making sure that you're always prepared. And I'm a little bit old-fashioned with the old-fashioned written style. People might say, "Oh, it's a little bit old hat." I mean, I've had people get in touch with me, Suleiman, who have said to me, "Oh, I'll watch your interviews." And I said to one particular person, I said, "You can't." I said, "You can read them." I said, "But you can't watch them." But I think it's because they expect that it's obviously a YouTube based. But if I was to put a Dutch interview up only in Dutch, then only Dutch people could enjoy it. Whereas in the written sense, if you translate it from Dutch to English, and the person who's doing it has lived in the country for nigh on 15 years, and the language skills in Dutch are as good as what they were in their mother tongue, then you know that you can produce amazing quality, which is very important.
No, 100%. And I love the way that you're doing, obviously, trying to not only bring the Dutch to the English, but the English to the Dutch, and that whole kind of bridging the gap between them, because a lot of people won't in particularly watch content because they don't understand it. You know, I'm lucky enough that my mother tongue is actually different to being English. You know, I'm from the Asian background, so a few of the Asian languages I understand. Some I can speak, some I just understand. But but one big question that I always and I have to ask every single guest before the show goes is, if you could be known for, what do you want to be known for, and what legacy do you want to leave behind?
Well, that's an amazing question. That's an amazing question.
And I think it puts people on the spot because I never tell them to prepare for it because I just want to see their raw reaction to that question.
Well, first and foremost, a great question. I think, obviously, like a player, you can't handpick a career. You can have ambitions, but you can't handpick a career. You can have an injury, a new manager coming in, new formation. You can be marginalised. I think I would like to be remembered as someone who brought different facets and different stories of world football to a wider audience. One of the things I'm most proud about, Suleiman, is every single one of my interviews, whether you Google me or you check out my work at current publishers or previous publishers, it's free. There's no paywall, so you can read it. And particularly in the middle of COVID, when people are struggling, if they kind of get that sensation that they can go and read an interview about a player that they admire, or they have, they know that, oh, there's a new interview being published on Football CFB by myself today on a Monday, or on a Wednesday, for example, published on the Secret Footballer. Sometimes it's different days, but mainly on a Wednesday. It's my way of giving back to people. You know, you've got a world with so much what they love to call misinformation. And for me, it's about telling the truth and making sure that somebody who reads my work, there may be people are listening to me today for the first time and they might Google my previous work and they may think, wow, 300 interviews, you know, players and managers at all different levels. You know, it's nice for them to delve back into the archive because, you know, I look back on a fantastic journey. But I think to answer your question, I think, you know, to have brought stories of world football to a wider audience. You know, when you hear about African football with Stanley Amusi winning the African Cup of Nations with Nigeria, Asan Cisse, who's recently qualified with Gambia for the African Cup of Nations for the very first time. And when I spoke to him, and he obviously is a striker of Zurich, he was saying to me, he said, to qualify for that tournament and to win for our people and to represent my country means an awful lot. To look at North America with Kenneth Vermeer. Kenneth Vermeer was an Ajax goalkeeper who ended up signing for Feyenoord. And to speak to him one-to-one about how did that transfer come about, because there are still people here in the Netherlands scratching their heads as to what happened. But in my interview with him, you read that interview. And also with British football as well, you get a lot of people forget which players play for which clubs. You know, it's not always about the shining lights. Remember, there was a English football before the Premier League. English football was apparent before the Premier League. Before the Premier League started, we had an amazing national team, reached the World Cup semi-finals. Also, as well, we had the likes of the First Division, which had I believe 24 teams at one stage, and you know, so there's stories there. And it's about making sure that people don't forget these stories. So, yeah, that would be my legacy. But we'll just have to wait to see what the future will bring.
No, you're definitely on the right path for that, man, because I think there's so many people that I've spoken to as well who sing your praises about what you do. And you're going about things the right way. You know, you're bringing eyes in a positive light to football. There can be a lot of drama around football, and obviously trying to debunk that is brilliant to see. Billy has got a question here, but I'm going to kind of tweak this slightly because obviously we know you don't really have a favorite part per se. But I want to say, who was the one where you interviewed them that were probably unknown and are now kind of in the limelight? Like, what's the interview where I'd say from the grassroots level or kind of like in the lower leagues that's now gone on to becoming kind of someone in the main media light, if that, I hope that makes sense.
Oh, no, it does make sense. It does make sense. Obviously, when you've got such a massive portfolio. It's difficult to pick one out, but obviously, as we're Arsenal supporters as well, what I will do is I'll touch on Jill Roord. Jill Roord, I interviewed her when she was playing for Bayern Munich, and she was an international. But outside of the Netherlands and Germany, she certainly wasn't known in England. There was obviously it's great that Arsenal looked at her, but she was a fantastic personality when I spoke to her, and when she was at Bayern Munich at the time. And obviously, we didn't know that Arsenal was going to come in, but they did. And it's great to see her doing so well at Arsenal Women. And obviously, having spoken to Van der Donk as well and Miedema, I've just got to bide my time a little bit because, in the words of her representatives, there are only 24 hours in a day. So I think I'll be speaking to her eventually, but I'll just have to bide my time. But I think, to answer your question, I'd touch on Jill Roord, I think, because she was very, very polite, and you could tell that she would go on to have a great career. She was already, played for FC Twente, capped by the national team, playing for Bayern Munich. But to go on to become a success in the Women's Premier League is also a very special feat, and I'm delighted for her.
No, definitely not. That success story was brilliant to see as well. I've only just recently, obviously, gotten into women's football, so I am going to ask you the question as well. I've been advocating it on Twitter this season. I've been loving every minute of it. It's fascinating. It's so sort of, I wouldn't say relaxed, but it's so fun to watch. It's stress free for me because it's so attacking. Like they want to win, and in the football game, it's become so sort of tactically broken down. The coaching is so video analyzed, and when you come into it's like a fresher breath air, the old school style of football where it's so raw and it's so attacking. What would be your sort? Because for me, I want to promote women's football. I'm loving every minute that I watch it, from the World Cup, from the Euros to the women's. Even yesterday, I was watching Chelsea play, because I'm really intrigued by Emma Hayes' approach to football as well, thinking that she could definitely be getting a job into men's football or whatever she wants to do. England under 21s is looking like it might open up soon. What would be your sort of take on women's football? And essentially what I'm kind of asking is, why should people watch it?
Well, first and foremost, I'm delighted, especially in the portfolio I have, that there's been a fair few women interviews at all different levels, for likes of Helen Ward, Daniela van der Donk, Jill Roord, Dominic Bloodvedder, also former Gooner, and also coming up the likes of Stephanie Roach as well, Chloe Lacasse at Benfica. I think one thing I'd like to make clear, Suleiman, to people who may not be aware of the hard work that women have put in football, is a lot of them started life as students that would learn a skill, that would learn a trade, that would go to university and also prepare for life as a professional. So I think in terms of the education of the women's game, I think it's important to realise how hard these players have worked. I think a lot of people seem to jump on the bandwagon of trying to compare men's football and women's football. It's impossible to do. If I tell you the men's team of AC Milan and Benfica, you know exactly who they are. But the women's team of AC Milan has only been in existence for 3 years, and the women's team of Benfica has only been in existence for 2 years. So therein lies the disparity between the history of the clubs. You see more and more clubs that are world renowned in men's football having a women's team. And also as well, I spoke to Julia Simic recently, who plays for AC Milan. She's a German player who plays for AC Milan. And she was saying that football is very male dominated. But she said when she had the opportunity to sign for AC Milan, having already played for Bayern Munich, we were talking about her time at Bayern Munich. And she was saying that she was at a huge club in Bayern Munich, but they didn't quite grasp the opportunity they had, that they've got a really, really good women's team as well as a men's team. So I think that people that try to draw the comparisons, I think you've got to delve a little bit deeper. Obviously, my background with interviewing women players and managers, it gives me a great source of information and provides a great insight. But I think people drawing comparisons already, I think now is not the time. Just enjoy it for what it is. And there are some great players. Don't be don't be afraid to look. I mean, to give you an example of women players that I was unaware of, Wendy Renard at Lyon. She's over 6 foot tall. She's completely empowering. I spoke to Helen Ward, and she was in the tunnel, and you see a big, huge, empowering player coming towards you and standing next to you. And she received a nudge from her teammate in the tunnel. She said, don't worry about it. Maybe she's slow. And then they got out on the pitch and they realised that she's anything but slow. And another player of Benfica, Silvia Rebelo, I think she'll go on to do amazing things. I think she'll go on to do absolutely amazing things for the Portuguese women's team. I think Arsenal needs to get on the case with her because I think she's an excellent player. So I would say to people, just enjoy it. Don't come so much with the comparisons because, as I say, I wanted to reiterate the point that I just did. The men's team of Benfica and Milan have been around for years. Milan is 1899, I believe. And the women's team of Milan has only been around for 3 seasons. Same with Benfica, a long, long time, only been around for 2 seasons. So, just enjoy it, take it game by game. And once again, going back to my previous point, Suleiman, if there is a player that you really like, stick with that player. Don't let anyone tell you on social media, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, they're useless. Everybody has the right to an opinion. And in the words of the great Frank Rijkaard, who managed Barcelona, won Euro 88 with the Dutch national team, managed the Dutch national team. He gave a fantastic interview when he left Barcelona, and he was being eulogized by all and sundry. And he said he doesn't really get it. He said because there's a lot of people who were not satisfied. There was a lot of people who were not, the players were not doing what they should have done. And he was being pushed by the then journalist. And he said, look, it's just an opinion, somebody that says something. So when people who are disregarded for their opinions, just remember that it's just an opinion, and don't be afraid to have your opinions, especially on football, because everybody's got one. And if you see something that others don't see, stick with that and let that manifest, and enjoy watching that player in the men or women's game grow.
I have to applaud that one, because Frank Rijkaard was a hero of mine growing up as well. As a manager as well, obviously just before Pep Guardiola came in, everything that he'd done as a manager, as a player for Barcelona is always going to be remembered in history. Obviously, even under the guidance and the sort of leadership of Joan Laporte, who's now returned. And, him and Johan Cruyff have brought in some of the most inspirational quotes that have stuck with me for years as well. And that's one of the reasons why even the women's game, I've always said to people, look, it's never going to be like the men's game because it's relatively new. It's a new thing that's come in. It's like when you look at grassroots football, it's something new. There's always a new team on the block. You're never going to see the sort of quality of a team that's been around for like 15 to 20 years even if they stuck to grassroots football. So it's brilliant that you brought that up as well. I have got a question from some people, and everyone's saying you're a brilliant guest, and obviously they're loving the show. Guys, if you do have a question, because obviously I'm going to try and wrap it up on the hour mark. I don't know how long James has got because he's probably got a lot of interviews to prepare for. So I'll try and keep it to the hour. Bargav here, obviously the knowledge and skills are primary prerequisites. Where would you suggest younger people start on the networking front? But I'm going to add to that as well. I want to ask you about the traditional education side of things as well. Is there somewhere they need to start with that? Are there any sort of things that you would say definitely do, like English, for example, or definitely do media, for example? And obviously, where would you start with the networking as well?
I think in terms of the networking, if I turn it around a little bit, I think I've mentioned it earlier on today. If there's anybody watching this show today who has a command of a second language, however big, however well known it might be, if you are competent in that language and you're learning hard, I'm not saying that that's going to be your passport, but maybe if you are someone that speaks Portuguese or French or Spanish or Italian or even Greek, maybe approach players with the idea of interviewing that player in their mother tongue. And maybe the player will become curious. Maybe it will give you an opportunity. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it's just one particular facet that could open the door for you. Because, people say that football, that English is a world language. As someone who's travelled extensively, that's not entirely true. So I would say to anybody today, in terms of the language skills, if you are learning and you feel confident, why not try to approach and do an interview in that particular language and see what you can do.
No, definitely. And I think that's obviously one of the things that people forget is that as much as English is a universal language, it's not always going to be the one people are comfortable talking. So,
Absolutely.
and I think that's what the misconception people have is that obviously for us, we think that because obviously you're looking at America, you're looking at us, even in Europe, it gets taught, but it doesn't mean it's like my mother tongue. I can speak it and I probably could speak and have a good conversation with someone with it, but it's not the language I'm comfortable with. Like if someone said to me, "Oh, can I do an interview?" I'd rather you do it in English because that's the language I know more. It's like with people's like actual wherever they were born, that's the language they're going to be more comfortable because that's what they do. They're not going to speak English. They're probably going to speak Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, or different literatures of Spanish, depending on obviously which facet of the world they're from. And I think that's what people kind of do forget. And
absolutely. If I can just touch on a quick anecdote, Suleiman. I interviewed a Dutch player once, and they said the following to me. They said, "James, I'm so pleased that our interview is being conducted in Dutch." He said, "They said, you know why?" He said, "Because I can tell you so much more." And the depth of the interview really shone through. So it's about making sure that people feel comfortable as well. I mean, I've had... just to give a little bit of a funny story, do you know Jean-Paul Boetius, who played for Feyenoord and Basel and was capped by the Netherlands? Do you know of him?
I might do, but just not by not name.
He currently plays for Mainz in Germany. I interviewed him a while back now, and I arranged with the press officer that I would ring at a certain time. Press officer had me on speakerphone, and she said, "Oh, James, I'll pass you on to Jean-Paul." And he came on and I greeted him in his mother tongue. And he said, "James," he said, "is our interview going to be conducted in Dutch today?" I said, "Of course." I said, "Every interview I do with any Dutch player or manager is always conducted in their mother tongue." He said, "Wow, it's amazing." He said, "I wasn't sure because I heard you speak in English." He said, "Yeah, that's because I can't speak German." And he found that quite funny. But these are the small little facets. Be confident enough. As I say, going back to my earlier point today, Suleiman, I am man enough to admit that when I first started speaking Dutch, I was useless. But I'm man enough to admit that. Fast forward 15 years and people do not know the difference. And people come to me and say, "Oh, James, obviously I'm British, but they don't think I'm British. They think I'm Dutch with an English mother or a British father. Because obviously the level of the language is so good, but it's about remaining modest at all times. If someone gives you a compliment, let that give you even more encouragement, and never give in. If anyone today is struggling with any kind of foreign language, never give in. Don't give in. Always stick with it. You might be struggling. Always try to find that little bit of rest. We all have our points where you think, "Oh, I don't fancy it today." But even if it's 5 minutes, just going through specific words or practicing specific words, and obviously we've got YouTube with special videos and learning. Just give it everything you've got and be proud as well, because it's one of the best gifts you can have as a human being. I mean, it changed my life. I mean, when I was a kid pretending to be Paul Merson in the playground because he was my hero as a young Arsenal fan, shooting from distance and doing the famous celebration, which my mother was also raised eyebrows at when I was doing that. And if you'd have said to me in that school playground or on that North Bank at Highbury that you'd go on to interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue and go on to live at 15 years in Amsterdam nearly, I would have said you was mad. But it's about carving out opportunities for yourself and always believing in yourself. Obviously, family support is very important, but we're only on this world in this world for an infinite amount of time, and you've got to enjoy yourself as well. So if you get opportunities like that, take them with both hands.
No, definitely. So I wanted to ask, because obviously I don't know if we've touched on this, but how did you start learning a new language? Is there any sort of secrets to it, or was it just literally YouTube and Or was it like, because I know some people say, oh, they watch movies in a different language and that kind of helps them pick up certain things. So,
Suleiman, I went to the School of Hard Knocks. I arrived in this country with a suitcase and my savings and nothing else. And you build and you build and you build. And as I said, my very first Dutch lesson, there was 20 of us. I remember the final exam. I remember passing the final exam and running down the street to try to find a payphone to tell my mother that I'd passed. Because I remember at school having difficulty with science and maths and being cast aside by different teachers. And then, 5 years later, you're speaking Dutch, and it's not the most romantic language in the world, but it's changed my life forever. I mean, I remember when having an affiliation with the Dutch national team, and like now as well, I enjoy speaking it. It's great to speak it as well. I went to language school. I went to the official course that they offer, which is Nederlands als tweede taal, which translates into Dutch as a second language. And there are times where I missed a lot of Arsenal games. I would be having to ask people, "Do you know what the score is? Can you find out what the score is? Can you text me what the score is?" Because you're going to a Dutch lesson, you have to concentrate, and it's very important to have a second language. Especially, I mean, I left Great Britain, but I'm still British, and I still want my country to do well. I'm not one of these people who thinks, "Oh, I've left now, see you later." I still have family there. I still have friends there. I still want people to be successful. And when you look at Great Britain from afar and you see people being disparaging comments and trying to say certain things, just remember that if you're coming across people that have come from a different country, how hard they've had to work just to get in the same position as you. So it's not about getting the opportunity to go abroad. Not everybody wants to do it. I wanted to do it from a very young age. So it's about taking the opportunities and being respectful to people as well. Your reputation goes a long way, especially in football writing as well, and show respect to people. If you can compliment people as well, give them a compliment as well. Tell them how good they are if you really believe that, even if it's certain players, and make sure that you do yourself justice at all times.
yeah, I mean, even bag of like myself, I'm just fascinated talking to you, James. Like, I've spoken to you off camera as well, and I've seen many of the interviews with people that I follow as well, and it's always brilliant hearing these stories. And even though I've heard it before, I'm still just as fascinated as the first time I heard it. But Gary from Don't Waste the Tweet has asked quite an interesting question, and I think with yourself, you speak to a lot of young and up and coming players as well. With Arsenal's dependent on the youth, with like Saka, Gabriel, ESR, Martinelli, there's a few still in the pipeline. Is there any reason they couldn't just rely more on the youth and phase out the senior players?
First and foremost, great question from Gary. We did a podcast recently and he made some fantastic points. So it's very underrated, Gary. So very well done. Yeah. Keep up the good work, Gary. It's not as simple as phasing out the senior players. I'll give you an example. I've spoken to players that have retired, and some of them have touched on the dressing room, what music they play in the dressing room, how to identify where you'd have little chats about what did you do at the weekend? Did you go out and about? Did you go to, obviously pre-COVID, did you go out to a bar or a disco, and identifying with the younger players? But these players also have to be guided by the senior players. When you look at the greatest players, I recently interviewed a player who touched on, if you look at the great players, they're not just great players, they're also great people. Very rarely do you find a very talented footballer who's a complete idiot. Very rarely does that happen, if ever. But these young players have to be guided by the senior players. One of the videos I saw recently about Aubameyang, where in the dressing room, you've got, I don't know which player it is, but you've got someone going, talk to the gram, and I believe that's talk to Instagram.
Yeah.
But I was brought. I mean, I know times change and people change. But I was brought up with a famous back four: Paul Merson, Alan Smith, Tony Adams, Rocky Rocastle. I don't think they would have been saying in the dressing room, talk to the ground today. They would have been saying how important it is to get 3 points today to try to win a league title. I know times change and I know society changes, but I just think at the minute we're just a club going through the motions, and we need. And I hope I'm wrong. As I say, it's just my opinion. But until a new owner comes in with a new ethos, I can't see us making any significant progress mid to long term.
Yeah, no, 100%. I do agree with that. You can't just phase out the senior players. You need a bit of both. You need someone that's mature, experienced, as well as to kind of help the youth develop. That's kind of, I've always used this as the Barca method, the Ajax method, where they've kind of mixed the two, and they've done it brilliantly for years and decades. But obviously, as we're hitting the hour mark, James, you've been an absolute. It's been an honor just to get you on, because I know how busy you can be and how in demand it is just to give your time up, for the people, to give advice, to give kind of, and this is what this whole this whole show was about. It's about kind of getting people like yourself on who have been there, kind of, on doing it and have done it, to give advice to the youth or the next generation of Jameses to come. And it's been an honor talking to you. The stories, it's been fascinating. I've had a good laugh as well, and I'm in awe of your story. Man, I wish I had a story like that to tell to my grandkids. Maybe because I'm only 22, coming out of education now, so hopefully I've got a story like that I can tell my children and my grandkids. And James, what I want you to do, I have put everything that we've talked about, all the publishers that you work with, but I want you to give yourself a massive plug where they can find you, what's coming up, and what can they expect from James in the future.
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for the lovely words and lovely compliment. I've really enjoyed today. It's always nice to take time out of my day to give a little bit back, because, that's what you got to remember. You got to remember that we're all here trying to do the best work that we can. So it's nice to give a little bit back and speak to a new audience. People can follow my interviews on @James Rowe NL, my Twitter feed. You can also check out my work for Football CFB and also The Secret Footballer. Every Monday, Football CFB publish a feature interview. Every Wednesday is The Secret Footballer. And there's some really interesting interviews coming up. I'm not going to give too many names away, but I will say there's stories coming up from Sweden, from Portugal, from France, from the Netherlands, and also from Nigeria. So looking forward to letting those stories fly and people taking encouragement and motivation from such interviews.
Yeah, so I mean, for the people who follow me on Twitter, obviously I'm going to and tag James into the tweets that I'm going to do after the show as well. But there's no excuses, because you could go in the description, or you could go into my Twitter where I've been promoting the show as well. And you can find everything that you need for James. Guys, support him, go at him, and go show him some love. That's what we try to promote, as a positive vibe. And the work that he's doing is phenomenal, man. It's opened my eyes up, definitely. I was someone who loves following football from all sort of standards. And, that's what I grew up watching. I used to love, like, Arsenal because of their sort of bringing unknown entities, foreign entities into the Premier League. And obviously Wenger changing the whole philosophy of the modern day football with his new approach. And, Barcelona doing the same, where it was all about youth, and the La Masia. That's why they're the two clubs that I've always had such a great connection with. Ajax obviously being affiliated with Barcelona in the sense of how much talent they kind of swap between each other. So and it's lovely to hear your story, Shane, man. I wish I could have you on for longer, but I do respect that people have a life and there's only 24 hours in a day, like you said. But thank you very much. And guys, just on the note, I have James's sort of someone that James works really closely with, Callum McFadden, coming on the show as well in the future, and he can give you a younger perspective. Someone, I'm guessing he's done less than yourself. Am I right, James, to say that?
Yeah, that's fine to say that, and I must also pay him a massive compliment as well, because I don't think that I've known anyone that's made such a short impact, such a huge impact in such a short space of time. To speak to the likes of Matt Letitia and Henrik Larsson, it's like a bit of a freak of nature, really. But I enjoy working with him, and we work well together. Obviously, Football CFB is his site. He approached me about publishing my written interviews, and we've done that since last August. And started off as we were meaning to go on with Courtney Howes, who plays for Aston Villa. So I'm sure he'll be able to tell specifically the younger generation, give them a different insight. But we work together really well, and it's about making sure that we produce quality at all times.
That's why I love talking to both of you. And again, James, a massive thank you for coming on. Obviously, everyone in the comments and people who probably watch later on are going to love the advice that you got to give. And I'm so thankful that you've been able to kind of tell your story and how, James Rowe became the football interviewer and writer he has, because I know a lot of people probably wouldn't give the time out to kind of give back. But thank you very much, everyone who has watched and stayed and commented and asked a question, because there were some brilliant questions there. Do subscribe, like, and give James a massive follow, and let's show him some love that I know we can. But thank you very much. This is If You Don't Know, Get to Know, episode 2. There's a lot more to come, but thank you very much, people. I hope you have